Michelle Phillips once sang about California as if it were a land of light, freedom, and dreams that never fade. But behind that clear, gentle voice was a life that almost always moved in the opposite direction of the very song she helped create. She came from a childhood marked by loss, grew up amid blurred moral boundaries, and stepped into the spotlight with a beauty that made an entire era turn its head. The public saw a symbol of carefree youth, but Michelle Phillips's real life was filled with closed rooms, dangerous affairs, broken marriages, chaotic nights, and secrets that could not be spoken while others were still alive. She was the co-writer of California Dreamin', the golden face of the mamas and the papas, the woman at the center of one of the most beautiful and most unstable bands of the 1960s. But the more famous she became, and the deeper she was pulled into a spiral of control, betrayal, jealousy, and collapse. She was once pushed out of the very group she helped build, lived through relationships where love and fear were separated by only a single door, and witnessed friends, her band, and an entire era slowly disappear. Michelle Phillips is not just a music legend. She is what remains of a beautiful dream that burned from within, and the closer one looks at her life, the clearer it becomes. Some people sing about heaven better than anyone else because they have lived far too long in the dark. Before the name, Michelle Phillips became attached to harmonies that captivated all of America, her life had already begun from a void nothing could truly fill. Holly Michelle Gilliam was born on June 4th, 1944, in Long Beach, California, into what seemed like an ordinary family, yet one that carried an early fracture within it. Her mother, Joyce, had suffered from heart disease since childhood, and evenings at home often passed in silence, with her lying on the couch while her father read to her, as if trying to hold on to something slowly slipping away. Then one night, when Michelle was just 5 years old, her mother lifted her head, lost consciousness, and never woke up again. Death came quickly, but its echo lingered far longer, seeping into every corner of a child's memory who could not yet understand what had just happened. And after that shock, her father, Gardner Gilliam, did not stay in one place. He moved his children from one location to another, as if constant motion could soften a loss that could not be named. From California to Buffalo, then back again, and finally to Mexico City, where Michelle spent some of the most formative years of her childhood. There, she attended public schools in Mexico, spoke Spanish fluently even before she could write English with confidence, and grew up among unfamiliar streets, in an environment where nothing felt stable enough to hold on to. There was no time to linger too long with grief, no true sense of home to return to. Michelle learned early how to stand on her own, adapt, and protect herself. But while that constant movement built resilience, her private life at home planted something far more complex. The father she loved was also the man who brought one woman after another into their lives with little attempt at concealment. For a child, those images needed no explanation. They quietly shaped her understanding of love, loyalty, and the boundaries adults often spoke about. Michelle grew up without truly believing in fixed lines and without feeling the need to follow them. By her teenage years, when the family returned to Los Angeles, nothing slowed down. Michelle attended Alexander Hamilton High and later Marshall High, played sports, studied music, and began moving within social circles where early maturity was the norm. One of the strongest influences at that time was Tamar Hodel, an older friend with a shadowed past and the boldness to pull Michelle beyond whatever boundaries still remained. Evenings no longer ended at home. New experiences, music, people, and more dangerous things came rapidly, as if life were rushing to make up for the years that had been cut short too soon. And then, not yet 17, Michelle left home. Not in a dramatic escape, but as a natural step for someone who had never truly had a place that could hold her. San Francisco opened before her, loud, free-spirited, filled with music and opportunities that required no permission. It was there, amid lights and songs that never seemed to fade, that Michelle Phillips stepped into the next chapter of her life, one she would never be able to return from unchanged. It was within that atmosphere, when everything was moving too fast to even think, that Michelle met John Phillips. In 1961, he arrived in the city with his band, The Journeymen, older than her, more experienced, and already living a life that seemed set in place, with a wife, Susan Adams, and 2 children. But those facts did not create distance, and they only made the attraction more dangerous. Michelle was not the type to stand on the sidelines. She stepped straight into that story, without hesitation, without secrecy, without even asking for permission. There was a moment that people would later recall again and again, when Michelle went directly to Susan's door and said plainly that she was in love with her husband. It was not a passing impulse, but a way of living that had taken shape very early. If she wanted something, she would move toward it regardless of the structures others had already built. John, a man not unfamiliar with affairs, found himself held in place this time. He left his marriage, and by the end of 1962, Michelle, only 18 then, became his wife. They left San Francisco and moved to New York, carrying with them not just a relationship but a shared ambition that had yet to fully take form. Their early days there had no stage lights, no major venues, only cramped rooms, acoustic guitars, long evenings filled with unfinished ideas, and the quiet sense that if they kept going long enough, something would eventually break through. Michelle was no longer a model in front of the camera. She began learning how to stand inside sound, learning to sing, to harmonize, to exist within a structure where the center was no longer appearance, but the ability to create something that could make others stop and listen. But their love was never just love. It always came with something else: power. John was the one with vision, experience, the ability to see trends before they became trends. And he was also the one who wanted to control how everything unfolded, including Michelle. She was loved, but she was also shaped. Her choices were no longer entirely her own, from leaving modeling behind to fully commit to music, to learning to sing the way John wanted, to standing within a group he built, singing the parts he wrote. Michelle was both the wife beside him and a part of the project he was constructing, and also someone being pulled into a framework she had not created for herself. Within that, a 3-layered relationship began to form, one that would later prove impossible to separate. They were husband and wife, collaborators, and 2 individuals caught in a struggle between personal freedom and control. Michelle brought boldness, instinct, and the need to live on her own terms. John brought structure, ambition, and the need to hold power. When those forces collided, they created a pull strong enough to reshape their lives and dangerous enough to form cracks that nothing would later be able to repair. From a small room in New York, where 2 people, both spouses and collaborators, were trying to find their own sound, everything began to expand in ways no one could control. John and Michelle were no longer writing just for each other. They began bringing in other voices, and as if they already knew that the 2 of them alone were not enough. Denny Doherty appeared first, a soft, warm tenor voice, just dangerous enough to disrupt the fragile balance between husband and wife. Then came Cass Elliot, strong, full of energy, carrying a confidence that almost stood in complete contrast to Michelle. When the 4 of them stood together in one room and began to sing, what emerged was no longer a set of separate individuals. It was a dense, blended sound, both clear and powerful, so striking that even they realized they were touching something larger than their own control. In 1965, the name The Mamas and the Papas was born, not just a band, but a structure in which music and private life began to intertwine so tightly that they could no longer be separated. In the bitter cold of a New York winter, when everything around them felt gray and heavy, John came up with the first lines about California, not as a place, but as a state of mind. He woke Michelle in the middle of the night. I'm pulling her into the process of finishing the song. There was no stage, no audience, just the two of them and a pressing urgency to capture something that was appearing and disappearing all at once. Michelle was not outside that moment. She was co-writing, editing, shaping the rest of the song. California Dreamin' was born from longing and the desire to escape where one felt trapped. A feeling so personal, yet so universal that when it was sung, millions instantly recognized themselves in it. When the song entered the recording studio, it was no longer pure emotion. It became a precisely operated machine. They signed with Dunhill Records, and Lou Adler stepped in as someone who understood how to turn four voices into a product capable of conquering the market. The best session musicians in Los Angeles were brought in, layers of sound built quickly and solidly, with almost no room for error. Michelle stood within that system, no longer the girl who had just left San Francisco, but a part of something moving at high speed. When California Dreamin' was released in late 1965, it did not just succeed, it spread like air that everyone wanted to breathe. The song climbed into the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100, launching a chain of success. And the Mamas and the Papas almost instantly became the face of a dream the entire nation longed for. But inside that perfect sound, cracks had already begun to appear very early on. 4 people stood close together to create harmonies so beautiful they almost felt unreal. Yet the distance between them in their private lives kept growing. Michelle, who had once entered her relationship with John with absolute agency, now stood between two opposing forces. On one side, music that was lifting her to the peak. On the other, a tightening structure of control. The greater the success, the more everything was amplified. Emotions, ambition, and the instability no one wanted to name. And as the California Dream began to be sung by the entire world, the very people who created it were the first who could no longer live inside it. That sound did not stop at simply being heard. It spread everywhere. In a very short time, beginning in late 1965, California Dreamin' was no longer just a song. It became a symbol. It appeared on the radio, on television programs, on magazine covers, seeping into every home and shaping the way all of America imagined California. A place of constant sunshine, constant freedom, constant chances to begin again. The Mamas and the Papas stood at the center of that wave, not only as performers, but as the face of a new way of living. But once that image was packaged and broadcast on a mass scale, it began to take on another meaning. Counterculture, born to resist the system, was now fed directly into that very system, becoming something that could be sold, consumed, and endlessly reproduced. And when their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released in 1966 and climbed to #1 on the Billboard 200, everything changed definitively. This was no longer a band on the rise. They were at the top. Recording sessions moved at high speed, touring schedules became relentless, and every public appearance had to maintain a carefully constructed image. Michelle stood within that, both a part of the sound and a part of the image people were consuming. The lights fell on her blonde hair, her almost flawless face, the way she stood between the other 3 voices. Everything combined to create a version of the California girl that the public could easily recognize, yet one that became increasingly difficult to escape. Then came Monday, Monday, the song that brought them to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, earned them a Grammy for Best Pop Performance, and solidified their status as one of the biggest phenomena in American music at the time. Success was no longer a step-by-step climb. It became a continuous push, where each new release had to surpass the shadow of the one before. Beneath those seemingly perfect harmonies, pressure began to build. Each voice had to remain in its exact place. Each individual had to exist within a fixed structure, and any deviation could shake the entire system. Within that structure, Michelle was not just a replaceable piece. She was the co-writer of California Dreamin', a contributor to Creek Alley, the soprano voice soaring above the dense harmonies, and giving the group its brightness that no one else could replicate. The media called her the clearest female voice in pop at that time, but what made Michelle irreplaceable lay elsewhere, in the way she existed simultaneously within music and image. She did not need to stand at the center to be seen. It was the balance between her flawless appearance and something elusive beneath it that made people unable to look away. But the more she was seen, the wider the gap between the real person and that image became. Michelle stood on stage as a symbol of freedom, yet behind the performances was a life stretched tight between love and control, between the desire to live by instinct and the obligation to keep everything within form. Success did not erase those contradictions. It only made them sharper, larger, and harder to hide in every glance, every note, every moment when the four of them had to stand side by side as if everything were still intact. And then, at the very moment everything seemed to have reached perfection, the system began to crack from within. Overlapping relationships, emotions slipping out of control, and the glances and silences between four people who had once harmonized perfectly, all of it slowly turned into pressure that could no longer be hidden. In a group where personal life and music were tightly bound together, any imbalance was no longer private. It became the band's problem. In 1966, everything broke in a way that could not be undone. Michelle was pushed out of the very group she had helped build, not because of her voice, not because of her ability, but because of what had unfolded between the members when the lights went out. The decision carried no emotional tone. It was cold and decisive, like a move to stabilize a machine that was beginning to lose control. Jill Gibson was brought in as her replacement. Recording sessions continued, but now within the same product, there were vocal parts Michelle had recorded earlier interwoven with new recordings by Jill. Even the image was adjusted. Album covers, titles, everything rearranged to reflect the new lineup, as if Michelle could be erased by altering a few surface details. But some things could not be replaced by technique. Jill Gibson could sing correctly, as could stand in the right place, but she could not carry the full energy Michelle had created from the beginning. Listeners sensed it, even if they could not name it precisely. The balance between the four voices shifted slightly, not enough to completely break it, but enough for everything to feel different. And when reactions began to turn from both the public and within the group, the reversal came just as quickly. In August 1966, Michelle was called back. Her return did not feel like a reunion. It felt more like an acceptance of reality, that no matter how deep the conflicts ran, the musical structure of the Mamas and the Papas still required all four original pieces to function properly. When their second album, The Mamas and the Papas, was released that same year, it continued to sell strongly, maintaining the group's position on the charts. Tours across America followed one after another. Stages remained bright. Audiences kept singing along to every song as if nothing had happened. But inside, everything had changed. Being removed and then brought back was not just an event. It left a quiet cut in the way they saw one another. Michelle no longer stood in the same place. with the same feeling as before. Her presence now carried something different, not weaker but sharper, more guarded. As if she had come to understand that within this structure, no one was truly safe, even at the very height of success. After that return, the group did not slow down. They moved straight into a phase where success continued, but no longer carried the same sense of wholeness as before. In 1967, Deliver was released and quickly climbed to number 2 on the album charts, proving that the mamas and the papas were still a force not easily replaced. Songs like Dedicated to the One I Love and Decay Alley both reached the top 10, keeping their name everywhere, on radio and television. But while Dedicated to the One I Love retained the familiar smoothness, Decay Alley carried a different tone, a self-narrative of their own journey, where the music no longer concealed, but began to reflect what had actually happened. Michelle stood within that song not just as a voice, but as part of a story being told, even as it had not yet reached its end. That same year, and they tied their name to the Monterey Pop Festival, an event that was not only about music, but a moment when an entire generation was brought onto the national stage. John Phillips played a central role in organizing it, shaping the program, connecting artists, turning an idea into a real event. But what happened behind the scenes was not just lights and stage. Michelle was involved in that entire process in ways few people saw, making calls to sponsors, persuading advertisers, handling the small details that ultimately determined whether the event could even take place. When the festival opened, everything looked like a spontaneous explosion of counterculture, but in reality, it was the result of countless calls, negotiations, and relentless pressure. By the time they stepped onto the stage to close the event, the image appeared almost perfect. 4 voices, lights, the crowd, all blending together as if no cracks existed. But what lay beneath the surface could no longer be hidden for long. Success continued, but the sense of unity did not. When the Papas and the Mamas was released in 1968, the music still held its quality, but internally, things had already begun to fracture in ways that could not be repaired through recording sessions or tours. In 1969, they still stood on the stage of the Hollywood Bowl, one of the most iconic venues, but it was no longer the image of a group on the rise. It felt like a moment being stretched out, when everyone already knew it could not last much longer. Relationships had been worn down by too many conflicts, too many unresolved emotions, and too many times of being forced to stand side by side when they no longer wanted to. By the time people like us arrived in 1971, music was still being made, but the motivation had completely changed. The album existed not out of a powerful creative need, but as an obligation to fulfill, a way to close out a contract, to avoid the legal consequences of not doing so. The melodies were still there, but they no longer carried the same energy that had once made the entire world stop and listen. And then, when there was no longer any reason strong enough to keep them together, the Mamas and the Papas dissolved. There was no single moment that marked the end, only a silence that slowly stretched on until no one tried to pull it back anymore. When the music stopped, what remained was not the hit songs, but the relationship that had both nurtured and ultimately broken the very music itself. Michelle and John Phillips did not step out of the story of the Mamas and the Papas. They carried it into their private lives, where nothing was softened by harmony anymore. They met in 1961 in San Francisco, when Michelle was still a girl not yet 17, while John was already a musician with a wife and 2 children. That imbalance did not make her step back. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify the connection. It as if Michelle was drawn into a world that was both more adult and more dangerous than anything she had known before. When John left his marriage, the relationship was no longer a brief affair. On New Year's Eve of 1962, they were married. Michelle was only 18, young enough to believe that love could transcend all structures and naive enough not to see the cost that would come with it. New York became the place where they lived and worked together, writing music, building a band, and at the same time constructing a system in which John stood at the center. He was not only a husband, but the one who shaped Michelle's entire direction, from music to the way she existed within that world. Control did not appear in the form of clear rules. It seeped into small decisions: where she lived, how she worked, what she should and should not do. Michelle, who had grown up without fixed boundaries, did not resist it at first. She blended into it, becoming part of a relationship that was both love and shared ambition. In 1968, while the band was still active, Michelle gave birth to their first daughter, Michelle Phillips. The arrival of the child did not stabilize anything. It only made the existing tensions more visible. Then personal space became suffocating, not because of a lack of room, but because of everything that remained unspoken. John maintained strong control, while Michelle began to react in her own way, not through direct confrontation, but by breaking the limits he tried to impose. Affairs appeared, not from one side alone. Betrayal was no longer an isolated event. It became a prolonged state in which both of them were aware, yet neither stopped. That did not only damage their personal relationship, it bled directly into their work, making every interaction between them, on stage and off, carry a tension that could not be hidden. At times, John's control no longer stopped at emotions or professional decisions. It became a pressure that forced Michelle to leave that space in order to continue existing on her own terms. By May 1969, they officially filed for divorce in Los Angeles. There was no sudden collapse, only a process that had stretched to the point where continuing was no longer possible. When the papers were signed, what ended was not just a marriage, but a structure that had shaped both Michelle's career and identity for nearly a decade. Yet what had happened between them did not end there. It continued to exist in the music they had created, in the stories later told, and in the way Michelle entered future relationships, always carrying the memory of a love that had lifted her up and pulled her down in the same motion. After leaving her marriage with John, Michelle did not only carry the memory of a complex relationship, she also carried a child. Michelle Phillips grew up amid all the echoes that had not yet settled. Born in 1968, at the very moment everything in Michelle's life was beginning to fracture, Michelle was not raised in what could be called a stable environment. There was no long-term fixed home, no steady rhythm of life, and no clear boundary between the adult world and that of a child. Michelle was not the kind of mother who withdrew from the outside world to create a protected space for her child. She kept moving, kept working, kept stepping through relationships and environments where Michelle could only observe more than be shielded. Changing rooms, people coming and going, long parties. The conversations a child was not meant to understand. All of it became part of Michelle's childhood before she could even recognize what normal meant. At the same time, the bond between mother and daughter was not simply gentle, it was more complex, both close and distant. Michelle loved her child, but the way she loved did not always take the form of stability. There were periods when Michelle stayed very close to her mother, witnessing every shift, every change, every stage in which Michelle struggled to stand after everything that had happened. There were also times when distance appeared, not because of a lack of love, but because Michelle's life did not allow anything to remain in one place for too long. As Chinna grew older, the influence of that environment became clearer. She entered music, becoming part of Wilson Phillips, unconsciously continuing the path her mother had taken, but in a different way, within a more stable structure, a more controlled system. Their relationship was no longer that of protector and protected, but a reflection between two generations, one who had lived through the most chaotic era of music and culture, and one who grew up in its aftermath. Not everything between them was easy. Differences in how they viewed life, choices, what should be held on to and what should be let go, at times created distance. But there was a thread that never broke. The understanding, in their own ways, that they were shaped by the same story. Without needing to say too much, without needing to explain everything that had happened, yet that connection remained, quiet, yet strong enough to keep them in each other's lives, even as everything around them had changed. After stepping out of her marriage with John, Michelle did not leave the orbit of powerful and unpredictable men. She moved deeper into it. Her later relationships no longer carried the sense of building or partnership as before. Instead, they became collisions, where emotion and instinct often came before thought. In 1970, while working on the film The Last Movie in Peru, Michelle met Dennis Hopper, a man at the height of fame after Easy Rider, yet simultaneously slipping into a state of increasing instability. Hopper was nothing like John. He did not build structures or keep things contained. He broke them. For Michelle, who had just escaped a tightly controlled relationship, that chaos held a unique kind of pull. She entered this connection with something close to a desire to save, a drive that made her believe she could help someone who was drifting off course. The days on set did not remain separate from private life. The boundary between work and emotion almost did not exist. By the time the film ended, the relationship had already gone too far to stop. On October 31st, 1970, and they were married in a ceremony that felt strange, neither formal nor aligned with any familiar standard, much like Hopper himself. Candlelight, personal rituals, an atmosphere that was half serious, half chaotic, it all seemed to foreshadow what would follow. Only a few days later, the first signs could no longer be ignored. Hopper's moods shifted unpredictably. His behavior became erratic. Outbursts appeared without warning. In the private space, where safety should have existed, there was instead a growing sense of instability. Stories later told about him firing a gun inside the house, about actions that terrified Michelle and her young daughter, about moments when he lost control of himself, were not isolated incidents. They formed a continuous chain of experiences where each passing day made it clearer that this could not last. Even the way he perceived the relationship drifted away from reality. There were moments of suspicion, moments when he did not recognize the woman who had just become his wife. The demands, the behavior, and the anger without any clear endpoint pushed everything far beyond any concept of a normal shared life. In that state, Michelle was no longer standing in the position of someone trying to save another person. She had to find a way out. The intervention came from her own family. Michelle's father stepped in, pulling her out of a situation that, if it had continued, might have led to consequences beyond emotional damage. He took her to a lawyer, forcing her to face a decision she had hesitated to make. End everything immediately. After just 8 days of marriage, Michelle filed for divorce. A span of time almost impossible to believe, yet long enough to leave a mark she could never erase. What happened during that time was not just a failed relationship. It was an experience that pushed Michelle to her limits, where she had to recognize that not every attraction is worth holding on to, and not every intense emotion can become something lasting. When she left Dennis Hopper, she was not only leaving a man, she was leaving behind a state of living she would never return to in the same way again. What happened with Dennis Hopper did not make Michelle turn away from love, but it changed the way she entered relationships afterward. It was no longer the unconditional leap she once made, but not entirely cautious either. She was still drawn to men who were prominent, talented, and carried a distinct magnetism. But each relationship took on a different tone, as if she were searching for a balance she had never known. Now, Jack Nicholson entered Michelle's life just after she left Dennis Hopper, during a period when she was trying to find her footing in film. He was not yet an icon, but sharp enough to pull her deeper into Hollywood, not only as an actress, but as part of the power structure behind it. That relationship did not last long, but it opened a new direction. Warren Beatty appeared afterward, quieter but leaving a deeper imprint, a connection Michelle would later admit was the hardest to forget. Not explosive, but lingering, like a mark that could not easily fade. The relationships that followed no longer carried the same chaotic intensity. Robert Birch came with a marriage that unfolded quietly and ended just as quietly, leaving no loud fragments behind, but also not deep enough to hold on to. Granger Hines brought a different kind of stability, and with him, Michelle had a son, a new anchor in a life that never stopped shifting. Jeffrey Tozer entered with an attempt to build a family in their own way, as they adopted a child together, yet it too could not last. Only when Steven Zack appeared did Michelle remain in a relationship long enough that nothing needed to be proven. No marriage, no drama, just a steady presence that lasted nearly 2 decades, until death closed it in a way she could not control. Alongside all of those relationships, there was one person who was not a lover but held a deeper influence: Cass Elliot. During the years of the Mamas and the Papas, Cass was not only a bandmate, but someone who understood Michelle in a rare way. In an environment where power and control were always present, Cass encouraged Michelle to hold on to her sense of freedom, not to be consumed by anyone, not even John. Their bond went beyond music. They shared life, shared private moments, and when both had children, those children grew up alongside each other as an extension of that relationship. Cass carried a secret she kept for many years: the identity of her daughter Owen's father. Even Michelle, the person closest to her, did not know. There was a moment when the two lay side by a swimming pool, and Michelle asked directly. Cass did not avoid the question, but she did not answer it either. She only promised that when she returned from London, she would reveal everything. The trip happened, the performance was successful, but Cass never returned to keep that promise. She died suddenly at the age of 32, leaving behind not only an emotional void, but also things that were never said. Years later, when Owen grew up and began searching for answers about her origins, Michelle found herself standing in the middle, between a promise that had never been fulfilled and the need of a grown child to know the truth. As she used her connections within the industry, followed the remaining traces, piecing together fragments of information. In the end, the name that emerged was Chuck Day, a musician who had once worked with the Mamas and the Papas. A secret kept for so many years was revealed not in a single explosive moment, but through the patience of the one person who remained close enough to follow it to its end. After everything had come apart, the band, the marriage, the relationships that stretched on and then broke, Michelle did not return to music in the same way. There was no announcement, no dramatic turn, just a quiet departure, as if she knew she had already reached the end of that road. What she chose now was not to remain on stage, but to begin again from an entirely different position: acting. Not a shift built on existing fame, but a return to learning from the beginning, attending acting classes, standing among people who did not care who she had once been, and accepting that she had to become someone new. Her first role in the last movie in 1971 was not large enough to define her, but it placed her in the right environment, a place with no room for nostalgia. 2 years later, Dillinger marked a clearer step forward. And her role as Billie Frechette was not just a supporting part in a gangster film. It was the first time Michelle was recognized as a real actress. The Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Newcomer did not arrive as a surprise reward, but as a sign that she could exist in this field through ability, not just through her past. Projects that followed, such as The Death Squad and The California Kid in 1974, kept her steadily present, gradually building a new professional rhythm, slower than music, but stable in a different way. By the late 1970s, Michelle stood at a strange point, no longer a music icon, but not yet fully defined as an actress. Valentino in 1977 placed her within a more artistically driven cinematic space, while in the same year, she released her only solo album, Victim of Romance. Music had not completely disappeared, but it was no longer central. The album passed without leaving a significant mark, as if Michelle herself no longer wished to return to what had once defined her. Bloodline in 1979 kept her within the world of film, alongside bigger names, though it did not always bring the recognition she was seeking. As the 1980s arrived, there were no more leaps forward, only a steady continuation. Michelle appeared more frequently on television. Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, Hotel, roles that did not necessarily leave a deep imprint, but were enough to keep her in the public eye. No longer the idealized image of a California girl, she became a familiar face, moving through different roles and settings, as if searching for a place where she could stand with lasting stability. By 1987, another opportunity emerged, Knots Landing. At first just an appearance, but by 1989, Michelle became a regular cast member with the role of Ann Matheson Sumner. This character was not gentle, not predictable, and did not need to be liked in the conventional sense. It allowed Michelle to bring onto the screen what she had lived through: complexity, control, layers of emotion that were not easily defined. This was not a comeback, but a second professional life, where she no longer needed to rely on her past to exist. In the years that followed, Michelle continued to appear in various projects: Second Chances, Beverly Hills, 90210, reunion specials of Knots Landing, then The Magnificent Seven, independent films, and documentaries such as Echo in the Canyon and Feminists. What were they thinking? Each appearance no longer carried the meaning of having to prove anything, but felt like a natural continuation of a long journey, where she was no longer bound by the need to be someone in the eyes of others. In 1986, amid all those movements, Michelle wrote California Dreamin', the true story of the mamas and the papas. It was not a gentle memoir, but a way of reclaiming the right to tell her own story. Around the same time, John Phillips published his version as well. Two narratives, both about the same period yet not entirely aligned. And details were reinterpreted, memories told in different directions, and from that, a quiet confrontation began. Not on stage, but in the way each person defined the past. Michelle did not avoid that. She stood on her side, with what she remembered, what she believed to be true, and what she was willing to keep, regardless of the fact that it would never fully match anyone else's version. As time passed, the names that once stood beside Michelle gradually disappeared. Cass Elliot was gone early. John Phillips and then Denny Doherty followed. The voices that had once blended into a sound that could never be replicated slowly fell silent, leaving Michelle as the last one still there, the only one who could remember exactly what it felt like when four voices first locked together in a small room in New York before they knew they were about to change an entire era. The legacy of the Mamas and the Papas did not end in the 1960s. Their songs continued to be replayed, used in films, rediscovered by later generations, and named as part of the history of American music. In 1998, the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a formal recognition of what the public had long known. But for Michelle, moments like that were not simply about honor. They were moments when she stood between past and present, seeing more clearly the distance between what had happened and what remained. Her role also changed in a way that could not be avoided. No longer part of a collective, Michelle became the storyteller, the keeper of memory, the person journalists and audiences turned to whenever they wanted to understand a time that had passed. But memory is never simple. It does not contain only music and light, but also what was once hidden, conflicts, mistakes, things that each person involved sees in a different way. When Michelle speaks, she is not just recounting the story of a band. She is questioning how we remember, how we believe, and who has the right to decide what is true. At 80, Michelle has not disappeared from that world. From time to time, she appears in interviews, documentaries, or commemorative events. Not to return to the spotlight, but to make sure the story is not told incorrectly. She speaks about the past with selectivity, without avoidance, but without revealing everything. There are things she still keeps, as a way of protecting what remains of herself after decades of being observed. When asked about those years, she does not speak only about music, but about the feeling of living inside it, something that cannot be recreated and cannot be fully explained. Her personal life is far quieter than what was once associated with the name Michelle Phillips. After the death of Stephen Zach, the void was not filled by another relationship. There are no new names, no noisy stories. Family, her children, her grandchildren has become the clearest connection to the present. These relationships do not appear in headlines, but they are what keep her grounded in daily life, in a quiet and enduring way. A film project about the Mamas and the Papas still remains, something she has not let go of. Not out of nostalgia, but because she wants to control how that story is told. When the people who once lived that story are no longer here, retelling it is not just about remembering, it is about choosing. Michelle understands that more clearly than anyone, and perhaps that is why she continues to remain present, not to be seen, but to ensure that what happened is not turned into a version more comfortable than the truth. Do you remember the Mamas and the Papas because of a song, or because of the feeling that song left at some moment in your life?